What does the darkest side of the human spirit look like when stripped of every civilizing comfort? Today's guest is Peter Caffrey, author of The Ballad of Seven Bastards, a splatter western that delivers suspense, violence, and soul-crushing moments of horror set in a morally ambiguous world. He's a writer who resists easy tropes, finds honesty in grotesque narrative, and writes without fear or apology. Peter's work explores manipulation, retribution, and survival, pulling from a lifetime of experiences in journalism and an irreverent sense of humor shaped by triumph and tragedy. He approaches fiction with a punk rock ethos and an offbeat outlook that keeps his stories unpredictable, twisted, and always bold. This is the Dark Mind Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider supporting it by subscribing to my Patreon for exclusive daily blog posts and weekly book and film reviews. Head over to patreon.com/The Dark Mind Podcast and become a citizen of the darkness. You can also support the show for free by subscribing to my YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the dark conversation alive. So without further ado, I give you Peter Caffrey. Peter, welcome to the show.
Hi, Vince. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me on this 16th day of October 2025. I came across your novel, The Ballad of Seven Bastards, while browsing a Facebook group, and as someone increasingly drawn to splatter westerns, your work immediately stood out. I read it and was struck not only by its gripping Western narrative, but also by the dark philosophical undercurrents voiced by both the antagonist and protagonist, a world where moral ambiguity leans far closer to black than gray. The novel delivers suspense and intense violence, punctuated by soul-crushing moments of horror that leave the reader breathless. So I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you joining me on the show to discuss it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's a slight departure from sort of what I usually write, but it's something that's been many years in the making. It's actually been a bit of a drawn-out process getting that project done, but it was something that meant a lot to me to kind of get it over the line.
Yeah, awesome. So for those that haven't read it, just kind of give a brief synopsis. The story follows a man named Elijah Black, who is a drifter who rolls into a dusty mining town just looking for work. But one moment of weakness lands him on the wrong side of the law and puts him directly in the crosshairs of the town's ruthless owner, a preacher named Elder Monroe. Monroe and his 6 loyal enforcers, men with a vicious past, have spent years terrorizing the region. Now there are forces moving in the shadows determined to make these, quote, 7 bastards pay for their sins. And when Elijah gets caught in the middle, his only shot at survival is to become the instrument of Monroe's brutal retribution. And that is where the real bloodletting begins. So, in The Ballad of Seven Bastards, what does the Western setting reveal about manipulation, greed, and violent retribution that a modern setting wouldn't?
I think from the beginning, I think it always had to be a Western, and it always had to be a Western setting. And the reason I wanted that was I had to think about it, and you think, what kind of people were there? What type of people decided to emigrate and go to the New World? And I hate to say this, I don't think it's the cutesy image that Hollywood gives of people who want a new life. If people wanted a better life, they'd move to a city or somewhere where there was work. They might move to another local country, but to go right across the world to somewhere with no society, no infrastructure, no guarantee that things are going to be better. It could have been a lot worse. Those people were desperate. They were greedy. They were running from something. They had a past they wanted to escape. So, yeah, you've got to think the type of person who would go there wouldn't be the kind of person who'd think twice about pushing things to get their own way. And take that then, take those people, put them in an environment where society is fragile, where everybody is looking to crawl out to get above everybody else. In modern life, there's too much to stop that. So to me, it was that fact of having people with a vested interest in self-fulfillment in a place where it was pretty much lawless. I don't think it could have been. I think if I'd put it in a modern setting, it would have been ludicrous. You know, people would have read it and thought, "You're never going to get away with that."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you used a particular structure, which I'm sure I've probably read many times, just never actually heard the name for it. And is it the chiastic? Is that the pronunciation?
Well, yeah. I mean, in theory, it's based upon a chiastic structure. It's not truly one. The way that came about, it was, I think I started the book 6 or 7 years ago. And I had an idea. I wanted to do a Western. I had an idea for the story. I knew what kind of setting I wanted. And whenever I write a book, I'll write the first chapter and I'll write it and rewrite it until I get the tone, until I get the voice. And then that sets it for the rest of the book. But every time I tried to start it, it wasn't not getting the voice. It was that the first chapter didn't seem to be where I wanted the story to start. So I kind of put it to one side. And then I was sat with my wife one day. We were just sat in the garden having a drink. And she started telling me this story from years ago before she met me, when her and her friends went to see a tarot card reader. And the tarot card reader was basically crap. And she was telling me about it. But she had on, when she went, she was wearing a leather dress that she'd had made by somebody. And the woman liked the dress. So my missus, realising she was a bit of a charlatan, said, well, I'll measure you up for a dress. So she ended up not getting a tarot reading. She ended up doing this measuring up. So she was just telling me the story. And then right at the end, she said she learned to read the tarot cards in prison. And just that one line, I went, I've got to go. And I went and sat down and wrote the first chapter. And that was Loretta. And it was Loretta kind of wasn't a character until that moment. And then that became the hook on which I started it and on which it all based. So I'd already been thinking about it for about a year by the time I started writing it. And then I got about halfway through and everybody started releasing splatter westerns. So I thought, I'm just going to shelve it. And I put it to one side, partly because I didn't want to confuse people, because I didn't know what they were going to do with splatter westerns. And I didn't want people to think, oh, it's another one of those. So I didn't want to confuse the readers. And I also didn't want people to think, oh, he's riding on their coattails. So I put it to one side and forgot about it. But every time I went back to it, I'd kind of add bits and I'd develop it. And then somebody else would do something with a Western and I'd think, right, I'll put it on ice again. So it sort of grew in unusual ways. And to put it in context, at one point it was called The Ballad of 13 Bastards. But it just was so confusing. So I trimmed it down. But it didn't seem to matter. Every time I got halfway through sort of rereading it, and something was wrong, and I couldn't work out what was wrong. And I thought at one point, because nearly everything I do has got some very dark humour in it, I thought, there's no humour in it. Do I need to put humour in it? But that just ruined the story. And I kept trying things and I couldn't work it out. And it must have been probably when, let's have a think, probably end of last year. I think I was on a bike. I was out on a bike ride just on my own. And it suddenly just dawned on me, and I thought, it's the structure. The structure isn't working. The story is, by trying to fit into that 3-act structure, the story was getting bogged down in the middle. And so I kind of didn't decide, I want to write something with a chiastic structure. I think the chiastic structure found me and said, no, look, this is how you want to do it. And it's the first time I've used it. And my biggest fear was that people would see it coming, that it's too obvious. But of course, I haven't had anybody bring it up yet. But it's that was why I went with it, because the story kind of demanded it. The minute I decided to change the structure, I think I finished it in about 6 weeks, not including all the editing. But it just all made sense and came together. So yeah, I mean, I like the structure. Would I use it again? Only if the story demanded it, really.
Mm. And you may have said it and I missed it, but when was the time period that splatter westerns got popular? And what do you think, like, what was the impetus for that?
I don't know. I think they got popular. Let's have a think. I think it was early 2020s. 1 or 2 of them came out, and then suddenly everybody seemed to be doing it. And to me, that was I kind of backed off, because I don't like to do what everybody else is doing, because I think, number one, it promotes comparisons. And I don't know, I just like to do what I want to do. And I don't like to follow trends. I like to be a bit of an outlier. And I just thought, if the market is becoming saturated, then I would rather step back. Why is it popular? I think it's popular because realistically, it's a brilliant setting. You know, for all the things I said earlier, you've got desperate people, you've got selfish, greedy people, you've got a lawless environment. It's I mean, I think with some of the splatters, they've got things like werewolves and vampires in it. I try to steer away from that kind of stuff. I'm not a big monster and ghost kind of person, mostly because I spend my whole life laughing at the notion of monsters and ghosts. But I mean, I think the joy of a Western, I think some people have a bit of a down on it because of the Hollywood notions. But I think as a setting, it's great because it's lawless, and it's also very, very strange. If you research the period, there's some very odd things that people did, and it's great because, you know, it gives you that freedom to make people do really odd things.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the minimalism of what was available to people back then, like when you think of the elements of splatter, you know, extreme violence, debauchery, I mean, other than back-breaking work, what did people get up to? Guns, sex, booze, you know, opium. Yeah. I mean, just prime real estate for a really good splatterpunk story.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things a few people, you know, a few of the ARC readers picked up on was the language. I did have a bit of a tussle with that. And I now know that there's been this whole thing with Tombstone, which I've never seen, where people say, oh, the language was inauthentic. But I worked on the basis that nearly everybody was an immigrant. Well, everybody who wasn't native was an immigrant. The Germans, they love the use of fuck. The Irish and the English, cunt and bastard, and so rather than go with what was kind of seen as the Americanism, I went with how those immigrants would behave. I went with their attitudes. You know, the way they sort of consider the natives. You know, they went out there to take that land off them. It's nice to sit here in the 21st century and kind of have sensibilities about it. But these people didn't, and pretending they did is a nonsense. They went out there, they took the land, they destroyed it. All they wanted was what they could get for themselves. There's nothing wrong with that, because you know, they went to do that. I'm not justifying it, but I'm saying when you write it, you can't shy away from it. You can't say, "Oh, I won't have them do that," because nowadays we think it's wrong. They do it because that's what they did then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of speaking on that, how do you decide between restraint and excess when writing violence? Like, obviously, you didn't shy away from writing what actually happened, but when you're describing it, do you kind of maintain a certain line of restraint? Because it's not like gratuitous. It's very well placed, obviously, but as far as the length you go.
It's what the story demands. I mean, the story is about retribution. And if you're going to exact retribution, you want to do it properly. There is a fine line. I don't like to write gratuitous violence. In fact, some of the, you know, if you take other books in Hee-Haw, there's a lot of it there which is implied. It is very violent. It's very aggressive, but a lot of it's psychological violence. But I wrote it deliberately to be somewhat restrained because I wanted to hint at it. Whereas in Seven Bastards, it's all about that revenge. It's all about that making somebody pay the price. I think it really varies. I think every book, every story, I tend to write what the story needs. I'm quite happy to allude to it, and I'm also quite happy to, you know, get bollocks deep in it. I don't, you know, it's whatever's needed.
Uh-huh. When you were talking about shelving the book because splatter westerns had gotten popular, was that difficult? Because I mean, it's not exactly an apples to apples comparison, but if somebody told me like, "Hey, you can't do the podcast for a couple of weeks. You need to do this instead," I'd be like, "Fuck you."
I think it was. I mean, it wasn't something that anybody put pressure on me to do. I looked at it and I thought, I'm going to hold back because I wanted it to have the right impact.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not saying that somebody forced you. Just that, like, when you made the decision, was it still hard to do?
No, not really, because it made sense. It made sense for me, and it made sense for the book. And to be honest, in a way, it worked because the book ended up being very different to what it would have been if I'd just pushed ahead. I think if I'd just pushed ahead, it probably would have been just a straightforward violent Western.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's not a straightforward violent Western now. No. But I like to think it's got a little bit more to it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Was there a moment when a, quote, bastard redeemed themselves in your eyes? You know, even if the story didn't allow for it?
I think they all redeem themselves in a way. I think it's hard because they're exactly who they're meant to be. And it's funny, actually, we were at a book con and I was talking to somebody who'd read it, and they were quite surprised when I said if I had to go to the pub with any one of them, I'd go with Jeremiah.
Really?
Yeah. He's straight down the line.
I'd go with Earl for some reason. I just like the evil motherfuckers.
Yeah, Earl was good. I liked Earl because he was clever and he was resigned to the fact that he was just a shit. Whereas I think Jeremiah was kind of, I don't know, there was just something nasty and belligerent and almost antisocial about him. Having said that, I mean, I felt sorry for Loretta in a way, but you know, but it's interesting. I mean, you know, I suppose I like them all in different ways. I don't know. Do they? I don't think they could redeem themselves. I don't think anybody in that book redeems themselves.
Yeah, Jeremiah, he seems like he just kind of relished in the bad stuff he did. Earl, I think he was just like a sociopath. Everything was just like there was a reason for it. You
It
know,
was
I don't,
business. It was
yeah, it was
very much
business.
business. It was business with Earl. And I think with Jeremiah, it was just a job. And if he could cheer himself up by being a bit off the wall with it, and that meant being horrible to people or killing people, so much. It was like his little perk. Oh, well, I've got to do this job, but I can have some fun killing somebody. Whereas Earl was just like, this is business. I just need to get it done. I've got a job to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, you had mentioned, I forget, I can't remember if it was on another podcast or an article I read, that through it takes like a few different revisions before you feel like you found the right voice for the story. What's the feeling you get? How do you know? How, you know, what's do you get like a sign from the heavens? How do you know when you found it?
I think what I tend to do is I tend to come up with, once I've got the story locked in, and it depends. Sometimes it will be, you know, I'm going to write a story about this person who does X. And sometimes, like with Seven Bastards, there was so much plotting and planning in it, and it was very, very structured. And again, it depends what the story wants. But once I'm kind of set with the story and how it's going to progress, what I tend to do is I'll write the first chapter, and then I'll rewrite that chapter over and over again, sometimes 20, 30 times, until I get the voice right. And there is just a moment where, to me, it's not getting my voice right, it's getting the right voice for that story. So once I get to the point where I actually think, yeah, this now feels like the story should feel, then I kind of know, right, I've got a reference point, if you like. I can always go back to that first chapter. And the way I tend to write is I'll write the first chapter, get that pretty much polished. Then I'll write the second chapter. Then when I go to write the third chapter, I'll rewrite the first and second chapter before I write the third. So I'm constantly keeping in that voice. And that's the way I have to work, because if I jump ahead or if I don't go back, I'll let another character in the story will suddenly change the voice or something. So, and to me, every book has got a slightly different voice. And I think that's the way I like to work. I totally understand there's a lot of younger writers out there, people with ambition. And yeah, if you want to make a long, successful career, you've got to kind of have some consistency in what you do. You've got to have, you know, your typical voice, your typical type of story. And that's great. And I applaud them for doing it. I think I'm slightly different in that I don't really care. I just want to write what I want to write.
Uh-huh.
I'm not that fussed about, you know, being eminently successful. I would rather write stories I want to write and enjoy them and do them the way I want to do them. So I've got, you know, across everything I've written, I've got everything from, you know, quite heavy psychological horror through to, you know, absolutely over the top splatter, through to bawdy comedy. You know, I've got everything from, you know, quite a deep book about women and women being empowered, through to a comedy about child. So it's nice to be able to just go, oh, next I'm going to write this. So at the moment, I'm writing a bunch of very short monthly pulp stories, and that's kind of a palate cleanser after Seven Bastards. And they're just comedy. They're just very, very twisted, dark comedy. And then I've already started on. I've got another book which is more, I suppose, surreal, that I'm also working on. But it's nice because it means if I get up in the morning, depending on what mood I'm in, I can go and work on the project. But everything to me should have a different voice. And I know that's not the way most writers write, but it keeps me amused. Keeps you busy, as they say.
Yeah. Well, with regard to your writing process, tell me about the life and death of your notebooks.
Yeah. Are you aware of? I mean, it's very very common comment over here. Are you aware of the builder's house syndrome?
The builder's house syndrome?
Yeah. If you go to a builder's house, it's a shithole. Nothing's finished because they go out all day and they build people beautiful houses, and then they get home at night and they can't be asked to do their own. And it was a bit like that. So for really most of my adult life, I worked in journalism, so I would write pretty much what I was, not so much what I was told to write, but on subjects I wrote about. I wrote all day, every day, and then at various times I'd had these notebooks hanging around. This is all, of course, pre-mobile phone and internet era. And I would write my own stuff in the notebooks. And then when the notebooks were full, I'd put them in a drawer. And then when the drawer was full, I'd throw them in the bin and go and buy more notebooks. And that's what I did. And I could never really be bothered to follow up on them. So it was one of those things. And it was only, I think it was about 6-7 years ago, I wrote The Devil's Hairball. And the reason why that's such a strange book is, again, I just wrote it for myself. I wrote it for my own entertainment. And somebody read it and said, well, you should do something with this. So I stuck it on Amazon and then promptly forgot about it, pretty much as I did with my notebooks. So, yeah, I just used to throw stuff away because I was never going to do anything with it. When I finished work, the last thing I wanted to do was sit down and start writing again. So it was, although interestingly, I also come from a generation when storage was really expensive. And, people used to break into offices, take computers apart to take the hard drives and the memory chips, the RAM. It was that pricey. So I got into the habit of whenever I got rid of a machine, I'd take the hard drive out and stick it in a cupboard because it's memory. And it's a bit like if you've ever starved in your life, even if you get rich, you won't waste food. Even today, I'm reluctant to throw away memory because I remember when it was so expensive, people would kill you for it. And I've got loads and loads of hard drives. I mean, it's stupid amount because I just won't throw stuff away. And I was going through them the other day and I found a manuscript on it from ages and ages ago. And I kind of thought, I might revive that. But yeah, the notebooks were a thing. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people say, didn't you keep anything? No, just throw them away because it wasn't something that I had any intention of doing anything with.
Gotcha. Well, what is the most dangerous idea you've entertained in fiction, and how did you handle it?
Most dangerous idea?
Yeah.
I would say it's got to be.
Got to be what?
Again, I think it's a word that's more popular in the UK than it is in the US. This is basically slang for a fiddler,
gotcha.
child. And this is basically the story of a glam rock star who's a child. I've noticed it at book cons when people say, tell me about your books. And you go through them and you go, and that one's about a child. And you get that face, that it's very dark. Again, it doesn't glorify it. It's very much based on real people, and real things that happened in the music industry at that time. There was a point when I was kind of editing it, and I thought, should I just delete this? Should I just not do this? But it's not, like I say, it's not done in a sensational way. It's it does, but yes, it is dark. It is very, very dark. Um, I think the other one that's kind of dangerous, but wasn't meant to be dangerous, is probably fucked up bedtime stories. That goes places. Even now, I read it and I think I don't understand why. You see these people getting hounded out of the industry and cancelled, and I look at some of the things in that book and I think, Jesus Christ, that has just gone way too far. But it was, I mean, it was a very, very odd book. It was an odd book to write. It was, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I thought, I want to write a book for my grandchildren. So I came up with this idea of writing a children's book. And it was about a 10-year-old boy and his toy chimp. But the toy chimp was satanic majesty. And they basically have an adventure. So I wrote the first one. Now, I did them as stories. I did them as serialized stories for the basic reason that I didn't know how long I'd be able to keep writing them. And I didn't actually know whether I'd ever finish them. So I wrote them through treatment, and I wrote the first one, and then I read it back and I thought, no, I can't show this to kids. It's ludicrous. But by then I was kind of wedded to Arnold and Jimmy the Chimp. So I thought, I'll just carry on. And it just got darker and darker. And I think I was going through such horrendous things that actually putting other people through him in a book was quite funny. And it is, I mean, it is a comedy, but yeah, I mean, if people have got triggers, there'll be something in there. But somehow, and I don't know why, but somehow it seems to have escaped the people who like to go out and get offended on behalf of everybody else. But I think, yeah, it's, when I look back at it, I kind of think, yeah, maybe it shouldn't have been written. But ironically, it's one of these that doesn't get much traction on Amazon. But whenever I'm at a book show, if people say, talk about your books, as soon as I start talking about it, people go, I'm having it. I'm having that one. And so it sells really well in, it sells really well in face-to-face things, because I think people get a better idea of what it is.
So this is the correct cover right here?
Yeah, it's been through a few iterations. It was, I think at the time, there's a few readings of it and stuff, and I think a few people have done bits with it, most of which they censored for obvious reasons. I think because it was going to. I know somebody did something on YouTube, did some readings of it on YouTube, and they actually said to me, they got halfway through it and said, we can't finish this. We'll just get our channel taken off. We're going to stop recording them. So, thought, fair enough. Yeah, whatever.
So it sounds like you've got a pretty broad approach to, all the different stories you've done, whether it be short stories or novels. Is there a theme or trope that you always resist, even when you're tempted to attack it?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I won't do anything with the standard horror fare, because basically I just, I don't believe in it, and it doesn't scare me, and vampires, werewolves, ghosts. In fact, Crust Investigates was just me enjoying putting down every possible trope that's kind of mainstream in horror. No, I tend to look for something in a story that will twist it. It's a bit like setting a trap. In short stories, I like to set a trap that the reader will fall into. And then everything turns out to be not as they expect. And in novels, I like to litter it with traps and dead ends and things. it's about that element of surprise. And I think the problem with tropes and the problem with overused genres is they've kind of been done to death. So a lot of what I do, even though it's very strange and very weird, has some little kernel of truth in it that's kind of I, I think about something that's happened either to me or somebody I've known or something I've seen, and then I kind of use that as a, if you like, as a starting point, and then embellish it. And I think that keeps me clear of falling into that trap. I don't kind of think, oh, I must write a vampire book, or I must write, about a werewolf who's lost and wants to go home. I don't kind of tend to work like that. I'll see something and it will just start triggering a chain of thoughts. And, my wife fucking hates it because we'll be somewhere and something will happen. And for the next hour, I'll just be explaining how the world's going to change because of it and stuff like that. And, even if we're driving somewhere, we'll go past somewhere and she'll say, well, that's a strange name. And I'll explain to her how the name came to be. And she just sits there and sometimes just with her head in her hands thinking, what the fuck am I doing with him? And so that's the same way I tend to write. So no, I don't. I think I avoid all of them. I think I try to do nothing that fits the mold.
Gotcha. This question may not even make sense to ask, considering you said that you would like to have a beer with Jeremiah. But is there a character in your books that has unsettled or changed you?
Nah. They're all made up. No, they're all there for a reason. There are some times when I write something and I get a strange sensation as I write it, and I think, yeah, that really works. But the characters are all. I tend to do this thing where mentally I really work through my characters. I know what they'd order if they go into a pub. I know what sandwich they'd have. I know what shoes they like. I know even if it doesn't get mentioned in the story, I like to know everything about them. And I think sometimes, yeah, there's I've written some horrible characters. I've written some characters that I wouldn't like to meet, but they all serve a purpose.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we were talking about, basically all of the tropes you don't want to mess with because they've been done to death. So you've got your world, what I've heard you refer to as your mondo perverso world.
Yeah.
So, do you need the grotesque for honesty in this world?
I think the grotesque is part of honesty. I think we've all got something grotesque about us, and those who will stand there and vehemently deny they've got something grotesque about them are some of the most grotesque people you'll ever meet. It's a bit like Jerry Rubin said in the 60s, some of the longest haired people I know are bald. It's
bald with a ponytail.
Yeah. I think I'm slightly odd in that a lot of people tell me I've got no shame and I've got no filter, but I'm not. I'm just honest. I don't see, if you've done something as bad as it can be, it's part of you. It's part of all of us. And it's, if you keep doing bad things, then yeah, you're a wrong one. But I think the strangeness, the grotesqueness in life, it's part of it. And that is where horror lies. Horror lies to me, it doesn't lie in a ghost, and it doesn't lie in in a vampire, and it doesn't lie in a man in at a disused holiday camp with a machete. It lies in the things that are inside us all that we don't know how far, we don't know what will trigger us. We don't know what would push us that far. How many people have done horrendous things and probably never intended to do it, probably would never do it again, but in that moment they did it, and then they have to live with it. To me, there's so much of that can be explored that I don't see the point in wasting my time on ghosts and people rattling chains and headless horsemen. But I think that's the thing. The scariest thing about it is that none of us can actually really put our hand on our heart and say, I would never go there. Because whilst there are some people who are truly demented and do it for fun, there's equally many people who've either done horrendous things or had horrendous things done to them through no fault of their own because of circumstance. And that's what I like to think about. I like to think about how can something tiny create something absolutely grotesque. Isn't that the beauty of horror? Isn't that the beauty of writing, that you can create that? And I think, yeah, I think without the grotesque, there's no life.
Speaking of honesty, the grotesque, I was going to try and parlay this into a question about maybe your writing process, which maybe I'll still try to do. But honestly, just out of pure curiosity, when I read about you, I don't know if you were doing the programming or what exactly you were doing for speech recognition software, and then you found out at a later date that it was for sex robots.
No, I did. No, you got the wrong end of the stick.
Okay.
When I was a journalist, I specialised in very high end technology, and in the early days of AI, nothing like the AI as we know it today. Back when they were using it to, for medical things and to make sure planes didn't fall out of the sky and stuff like that. I wrote a story on a company that was doing speech programming. So what they were trying to achieve was a speech model that could be used for things like first level investigations and stuff like that. So I'd been to their company and I'd talked to their engineers, and we'd sat around and they'd show me what they were working on. And then about 2 weeks after I'd been there was a documentary on the television. And I think it was called something like Here Come the Sex Robots. And it was about these guys who basically make these very realistic sex dolls and the men who buy them. And I started watching it because it was hysterical. There was this old boy sat in a park with this clearly plastic woman, but he'd kind of bend her arm round him so she had his arm round him, and he was sitting there talking to her. And the guys who made these lifelike dolls sort of said to him, we're working on this sex robot. Would you like to see it? And he was like, yeah, really want to see it. So they had this sex robot. But the important thing was they said, we've just put the speech unit into it. It can have a conversation with him. So they had this guy meet this sex robot, and he walked in and they said, oh, this is June, or I don't know what her name was, but we'll call her June for now, for some obscure reason. And they said, oh, this is June. And he said, hello, June. And she said, hello. And he said, oh, my name's John. And she said, hello, John. And he said, how are you? And she said, do you want to fuck me now? And I was just crying with laughter. And he was like, oh, yes. And I was saying to my missus, the things they could do, but it's just shite. It's like, hello, my name's John. Oh, do you want to fuck me? And from that came the idea for Owning Emily, which was a short story about a bloke who, oh no, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I said to my missus, I really want a sex robot. I really want to buy one. And she said, what for? And I said, it would be so funny. You could get it to like mow the lawn, and it would just be mowing the lawn going, do you want to fuck me now? You're like, no, just carry on with that. No, do you want to fuck me now? No, just sweep the drive. And it became like, again, like I say, I go off on these things, and I thought, so I wrote a story about a guy who goes to buy a sex robot, um, who doesn't actually want to fuck it. He just wants to have a sex robot and make it do things. And I enjoyed writing that so much that I then wrote a few more, and it seemed at the time it hit a lot of them I sent off to magazines, and they were publishing them. And I thought, well, this is so that in the end, I wrote a novella as well, and that became Whores versus Sex Robots, which is one of the books. But no, so I knew what the technology was capable of, but I think it's great though. I think it's great that we can get this technology that will actually save lives. It'll make the world safer. There's all these things we can do with it. And even at the early days, before anybody did anything like they're doing with AI now, somebody also went, hey, we can make a sex robot. And to me, that's great. That's the kind of entrepreneurial spirit that I want to support through my writing. So no, but I mean, yeah, you got the wrong end of the stick, but I tell you what, if I'd been the guy who'd written the speech recognition program for sex robots, nobody would be getting shagged now. The sex robots would be standing there, they'd be like stood there with a thing in their hand, and the sex robot would just be talking bollocks at them.
Like making fun of them.
Yeah. What's that? What are you? It's just, to me, it's great. That's kind of how my mind works. I think, they go, oh, we can diagnose cancer in 10 seconds. Oh, and by the way, a robot can ask you if you want to see its arse. And you think, fucking show me the one who's going to show its arse. That's where the fun is. That's proper technology. This is the thing. All this fucking about putting men on the moon and stuff like that. What are they wasting their time for? They should have just make a load of sex robots. The world would be a better place.
Well, if I can ask something personal, I think I've...
Yeah, why not?
Hopefully you're okay with talking about it. Your issue, your fight with cancer, which your wife as well, like either very close together or simultaneously. I can't remember which one.
I think I was 3 years before her. So
okay.
I'm literally just coming up to 4 years in remission, and she's just been signed off by oncology after a year. So she's just starting the 5-year earn out, if you like. It's a shame because I always used to do, this statistic, 1 in 2 of us will be diagnosed. And I used to say to her, I've saved you there. You see, I've saved you.
Oh, there you go.
But now she's had it. I said, we've got to go and find 2 people who haven't got cancer and go out to dinner with them and say, hey, we've saved you too.
Yeah. That's some horrible
but go on,
stats.
sorry.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, like you already mentioned, when you were going through cancer treatment, you were writing your book, your collection, Fucked Up Bedtime Stories. And you mentioned that book had some of the most crazy, just begging for cancel culture material of all your books. So can you kind of describe your state of mind? And I think you mentioned you were also on some pretty hardcore painkillers, like where your head was at when you were writing that?
I think it's very, very odd because I'd always thought that if that moment ever came in my life, I'd fall apart. And when the moment came, I actually just thought, fuck it, this is my reality. I've got to deal with it. And we came out of the hospital when it was confirmed, and I just turned around to my missus and said, this is it now. We just deal with it. We just get on with it. I mean, it's horrible. There's my sister is a doctor, and she said to me, there's no such thing as as nice treatment for cancer. And it is, it's horrible. It's painful. It's debilitating. It robs you of your dignity. That's the first thing that goes, mine was in my head and neck, but I had more conversations about my arsehole than I ever care to remember. Because everything impacts. The chemo fucks your guts up. You know, the painkillers make you constipated. There's a story in Cock-a-Voodoo-Doo and Other Twisted Love Stories. There's a story in there purely based on one night I spent trying to have a shit. I was like literally lying on the bathroom floor all night crying in pain. Absolutely awful. But it's kind of, I think it's what's going on around you becomes your normality. So it's not frightening. But, you know, at one point they said to me, we might need to peel your tongue. And I was like, what the fuck are you going to do that for? And they said, well, we want to biopsy it. And the easiest way to do it is to peel it.
Oh.
And the first thing I thought when they said, I didn't think, oh God, this is terrible. I said to the surgeon, am I going to eat fucking crisps? And they said, can you actually eat crisps? I had a feeding tube at the time. And I said, no, okay, fair enough. Good point. But it becomes your reality. And it is a very distorted reality. So when I was sitting there, you know, I used to write bits of bedtime stories during chemo treatment, in waiting rooms. It does, and it doesn't become depressing. What happened to me was it was when I got the all clear. I think it was probably about a year afterwards. I had my final scan, and they said, "No, you're clear." And then after that, everything just caved in because I just had this treated like a job. You go in, you do your stuff, you come out, worry about tomorrow morning. And at no point, you don't go into that big, well, I didn't, neither of us did, go into that big weepy, I might die, woe is me kind of thing. You just deal with it. And then when it's all over, your brain does a brilliant job of just hiding it all away. And then when it's all over, it just kind of crushes down on you. And what I found really interesting, I kept a diary all the way through it, was I went back and read the diary and I thought, I don't remember half of this. It was only seeing it in the diary. You think, oh yeah, they did that to me. But I think what it did do is it taught me how the human condition can pretty much tolerate things that you wouldn't think it would. And it wasn't just me, it was the people around me and everything. And you start to realize what a tolerance we have for survival. And that kind of made it harder to have people, when something horrible happens to them in a book, that they just fold. And you start thinking, actually, they don't do that. People don't do that. People, you know, a few will. You always get some who will. But most will actually battle and survive and do things they don't, and take things that they would normally not take in their stride. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but it is quite an eye-opening experience.
So you're saying you kind of compartmentalized it or disassociated from it so you could just get the job done.
Yeah.
But once the job was done and you're like, okay, I can take a breather now, that's when it all just came.
That's when it all bubbles up. And it's hard. I mean, the hardest thing for me was that they tell you everything. They tell you everything that's going to happen to you in great detail. The mental stuff was the one thing they didn't mention. They said, oh, do you want to talk to anybody? And I was like, no, because at the time I was fine. And it was only when it was over, and I tried several things. I tried counselling, ended up rowing with the counsellor because counselling's difficult. Unless you get on with the counsellor, it doesn't work. And in the end, I was talking to a doctor, and he kind of interrupted me and just told me everything about how I was feeling. And then he said, well, if you weren't feeling that, I'd be worried. And I think it was just that realization that it was normal was allowed me to kind of go, right, I've got a handle on this now. It was not knowing why it was happening. And again, that's a great thing. There's an element of that in something that I'm kind of planning for early next year about that. that not knowing why something is happening and whether it's right or wrong. That was, again, to me, that's worse than a fucking ghost.
Yeah, definitely. Well, kind of a metaphorical question based on your experience as a journalist. What does fiction know about truth that journalism doesn't?
I think everything. I think journalism is pretty much presenting a case, but it's presenting both sides of a case in a way that people can make their decisions. I think fiction is very much the same sort of thing. It's presenting a case, but you're often only doing it from one side, or you might allude to another side. I think, to me, the only person who makes a decision on whether fiction is good or bad is the reader. They're the only person I care about. I don't care about critics, and I don't care about other readers. And if a reader doesn't experience what I'm trying to put across, then that's on me. I've got that wrong. And I think that's the thing. Somebody is taking their time and their effort and their money to read your story. I think it's got to hit them as true, even if it's the most ludicrous thing going. It's got to have something in it that makes them sit there and go, I want to know what happens. So I think it's more hinged on truth, but it's the truth of the individual rather than a generic and world held truth, if that makes sense. If you
Yeah.
ask a question like that, it's the best you're going to get.
Gotcha. Well, kind of backpedaling a little bit to when we were talking about that particular book that people get that look on their face. Does humor deepen or dilute dread in your work with horror?
I would say deepen. And the reason I would say that is one of the things I've noticed in absolutely horrendous situations is that people develop a sense of humor. It's kind of a protection. But I think too many people go through life avoiding humor. I see it everywhere. I don't think a day goes past that I don't have a conversation with somebody that I'll go away afterwards and laugh about. And maybe it's just me. Maybe I just see things differently. But I think one of the things I struggle with is if I read a book. I mean, I'll give you a great example: The Collector by John Fowles. It's a very, very dark book. It's a very, very dark subject, but the humour in it, you wouldn't say, oh, that's a comedy book, but it has such a rich vein of humour that you actually end up liking the bloke who's doing the despicable thing and finding the victim a little bit, well, grow up, will you? You've only been kidnapped and tortured. Don't you know? And I think it's that human element. I'm trying to think of the bloody book I've only just read recently. It's one of the nice things about having radiotherapy on your head. You do just forget things. It might come back to me. These things suddenly pop up in my head. But it was very, very bleak by a Japanese guy. Very, very bleak. Very, very dark. But it had a warmth, like a self-deprecating humour about it that actually made it entrancing. And I think this is the thing. I think sometimes when people say, "Oh, I don't like the phrase comedy horror or horror comedy," because usually that's a horror book with some jokes in it. I like to go for, well, I sometimes like to go for humour in that the people are humorous or they have a demeanour that is warm and slightly comical. That said, sometimes I do just go for absolutely stupid jokes just because you've got to. I mean, in Crust, his obsession with women menstruating is, but it's very true of that Victorian thing. Oh, a woman speaking up, oh, she must be on the rag. And that was, of course, as a recurring joke is, yeah, it's puerile, but it fits the theme. And now I don't know, I think humour should be everywhere. And sometimes I'll read really interesting books, but they'll be so dry, I kind of find myself not gelling with the characters. And I think that's the thing. To me, you want people who have a bit of humour and warmth rather than a book of jokes or a book of funny things.
Well, listeners at home, I don't know what's about to happen. I asked Peter if he would like to read a passage from the book, and he said he had a passage from an upcoming book, and it's, what did you say, 2 sentences?
Yeah, it's the first chapter.
Okay.
When I very first started writing was the late 70s, and it was during punk rock. And I kind of took this punk rock ethos of do it yourself. The problem was back then was that the only way you could get anything published was pretty much through, certainly in the UK, was through one of the major publishing houses who weren't going to touch anybody that wasn't a bestseller. And they certainly weren't going to touch anybody who was subversive. So there were a few sort of underground bookshops dotted around. So I basically, the first book I wrote, I typed it up, literally sat and typed it up. I knew a girl who used to have a cleaning job at a solicitor's. So I bought her a few beers so she'd let me into their office. And while she cleaned, I used to use their photocopier. Then I'd staple these things together. And everywhere I went, I'd have a bag of them. So if I went to a gig, I'd have a bag. If I went to the pub, I'd have a bag. And I'd talk to people and I'd sell them this book. And of course, there was nothing else you could do. There was no internet. There was no cheap printing. There was nothing, no print on demand. And I kind of thought, I missed that a little bit. There was a period, I think, beginning of the year where a few people in the indie author community started having a go. It all just got a little bit petty. And I got a bit disillusioned and I thought, I might just go back. So I started producing these one a month, these like just little short stories in a booklet. And this one is Mary Brannigan's Devil Baby, as it would be. And the first chapter of it I wrote, I believe, is the finest first chapter I've ever written in my life. So
Lay it
here
on
goes. Okay. 1. The realization. For pity's sake, Mary, your bloody baby's just eaten the fucking cat. That was the moment Mary Brannigan realized her newborn wasn't normal. There you go.
Well, what is the life of Peter Caffrey like outside of writing?
Well, pretty mundane, really, I suppose. I get up in the morning. I don't work. I gave up work when I got diagnosed and I kind of haven't gone back. And I think sometimes with the memory thing, I kind of think, oh, I don't really want to. But then, to be honest, I just can't be asked. So I might go back one day. I don't know. So I train. I do triathlons. So I train every day. So I'm either running or cycling or swimming. I brew beer. I make charcuterie. I read, but I don't read enough. I'm a bit of a weirdo. I tend to, if I'm editing stuff, I won't read anything. And if I'm writing, I won't read anything similar to what I'm writing in case it gets in my head. What else do I do? I attempt to play the banjo very, very badly. Really. And then I just kind of stand around and get in my wife's way and make sarcastic comments a lot. But I probably spend most of my time staring out the window thinking about absolutely ludicrous things.
And committing them to the printed word?
Yeah. I mean, there's probably more strange things that go through my head that never make it onto the page, but I don't know. I just find life an eternal mystery.
Indeed. Definitely. Well, Peter, it has been a pleasure talking with you.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, Vince.
Absolutely.
I don't know whether any of it will be fucking useful or not, but
yeah. So as we bring the show to a close, is there anything you'd like to plug, reiterate, or let your readers know about?
Yeah, just smile. Smile a bit more, you grumpy bastards. If anybody wants to know anything, I mean, petercaffrey.com, there's a shop. All my stuff's on Amazon. I sometimes post weird things about my dad knowing Pol Pot on there as well. Stuff like that. I won't go into that story. That's a very strange one. Yeah, I mean, generally, I'm occasionally, I'm not very good at social media. I'm occasionally on there. I usually make inappropriate jokes, and but also if anybody goes to the website and buys a book, I do a very puerile thing. I draw cock and balls in all the books I sign. If you ever end up with a book signed by me that doesn't have cock and balls in it, it's not my signature.
Oh man, that's how you spot a fake.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
All right, sounds awesome. Well, listeners at home, all links are in the description. And Peter, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you very much, Vince.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Be sure to tune in next Tuesday for a new episode featuring the best and brightest authors and filmmakers of dark literature and film. So until then, stay healthy, stay sane, and as always, thank you for listening. See you next time.